My name is Natalie, and the day my life really started was the day my parents threw me out like trash on my own birthday. I had just finished a long shift, dreaming of maybe a cheap takeout dinner and a small, quiet celebration. Instead, I pulled into the driveway and saw my clothes, my laptop, my boxes, all piled up on the front porch like they were clearing out old junk. My mom looked me straight in the eye and told me I was done living there. My dad stood beside her and did not even argue. On my birthday, I remember my hands shaking as I realized they were serious. There was no surprise party waiting inside, no cake, no candles, just my things on the porch and a cold message. I was out, and they were moving on without me. In that moment, every word I wanted to scream got stuck in my throat. My mom and dad kicked me out on my own birthday, and I said nothing. I just picked up my boxes, loaded them into my beat-up car, and drove away. No big fight, no dramatic goodbye. Just silence and the sound of everything I knew collapsing in my rearview mirror. I thought that was the worst thing they could ever do to me. But years later, after I clawed my way back and finally bought my own home, they showed up at my front door, walked through my living room like they owned it, and calmly told me, "This is a family asset. If you want to know how the girl they kicked out on her birthday ended up owning the house they tried to steal, stay with me until the end." It happened on my 26th birthday, the one day you are supposed to feel like people are glad you exist. I clocked out from my shift at the grocery store, feet aching, smelling like spilled coffee, but still a little hopeful. On my break, I had bought myself a cheap cupcake from the bakery section, thinking that if no one else celebrated me, at least I would. Driving home, I imagined something small waiting for me. Maybe pizza boxes on the counter, maybe a store-bought cake with my name spelled slightly wrong. When I turned onto our street, I saw it. Not balloons or cars or decorations, just my life piled on the lawn. My suitcases, boxes of clothes, a plastic bin with my old textbooks, my secondhand monitor wrapped in a blanket. For a second, I thought maybe there had been a leak or some emergency. I parked crooked, left the cupcake on the seat, and walked toward the house. My mom stood on the porch with her arms crossed. My dad hovered behind her, eyes on the ground. My little sister Jenna sat on the steps scrolling on her phone. My mom did not say happy birthday. She said, "You are 26, Natalie. This has gone on long enough. We need the room. You have to move out." I stared at her. "Today, you are doing this today." "On my birthday." She rolled her eyes. "Do not make this dramatic. We raised you. We did our part. You have a job. You will figure it out." My dad finally looked up long enough to add, "This is for your own good. You will grow if you are pushed." Jenna smirked and said, "Everyone I know moved out ages ago. You should be thanking Mom." I wanted to yell that I was the one paying most of the utility bills, that the Wi-Fi she used for her classes stayed on because of me, but I could already see how it would go. My mom crying and calling me ungrateful, my dad retreating, Jenna filming. In the end, I would still be outside, just with more bruises on my throat from shouting, so I did not give them a show. I asked quietly, "Where am I supposed to go?" My mom shrugged. "You are an adult. Stay with a friend. Find something cheap. Just do not expect to come back. We need to turn your room into something useful." Useful, as if I had never been. My mom and dad kicked me out on my own birthday, and I said nothing. I picked up a box, carried it to my beat-up car, and kept going until everything was loaded. No begging, no bargaining, just the scrape of cardboard on concrete. I glanced at the front door one last time and realized it was not my home anymore, if it ever really had been. I drove until the houses thinned out and highway signs took over, then pulled into a cheap roadside motel with half the sign burned out. The room smelled like old smoke and bleach, but the key was in my hand and no one could tell me to get out. I sat on the edge of the stiff bed, ate my cold cupcake alone, and checked my bank account. The number was small and scary. For a second, I almost called my mom to beg for a few days of grace. Then I remembered how sure she looked with my things on the lawn. They had not hesitated. So I did not either. Lying on that scratchy comforter, staring at the stained ceiling, I made myself a promise. I would never beg to go back to a place that treated me like trash on the one day I knew I deserved better. If they wanted me gone so badly, I would find a way to make sure one day they regretted pushing me out the door. The morning after that motel birthday, I woke up with a stiff neck, a pounding headache, and no safety net. I checked my phone, half expecting a missed call from my parents, some kind of apology, or at least a "what hotel are you at?" Maybe we overreacted. There was nothing. Just a calendar notification that said, "Happy birthday, Natalie," like a cruel joke from an app that did not know better. So I did the only thing that made sense. I got up, showered in lukewarm water, put on my uniform, and drove to work like my whole life had not just been flipped over. I worked my grocery store shift that day, pretending everything was normal, smiling at customers, scanning items, making small talk about sales and recipes while my brain kept screaming, "You have nowhere to sleep tonight." On my break, I searched for rooms for rent on my phone, filtering by cheapest first and hoping for something that did not look like a horror movie set. Seattle was only an hour away, and the rents made my stomach twist. But staying in that motel was not an option. By the end of the day, I had arranged to see a tiny studio in the city, the kind of place with peeling paint and a view of a brick wall. It was cramped and overpriced, but the landlord did not ask too many questions as long as I could pay the deposit. I signed the papers with the kind of shaky confidence of someone who does not actually know how they are going to afford next month yet. The first few weeks were brutal. I kept my grocery store job, but the drive was long and the pay was barely covering my rent. So I picked up a second job doing late-night shifts at a burger place a few blocks from my studio. My days turned into a loop. Wake up before sunrise, drive to work, scan groceries and bag milk for 8 hours, grab a quick snack in the car, clock in at the burger place, smell like fries and grease until midnight, stumble home, shower, pass out, repeat. There was no time to think about my parents, and that was kind of the point. One night at the grocery store, a woman came through my line who I recognized instantly. Monica Lee. She had been a regular for months, always with some kind of laptop bag and a Bluetooth headset, always talking about deadlines and investors into her phone. I did not know exactly what she did, but I knew it sounded important. That night she was distracted, scrolling through her emails while I rang up her stuff. Without thinking, I helped her repack everything when her reusable bag ripped. I taped it together, double-bagged the heavy items, and made some dumb joke about duct tape holding adult life together. She actually laughed and looked at my name tag. "You are the girl who always fixes the self-checkouts, right?" she asked. I shrugged, a little embarrassed. I just punched a few buttons and reset the machines when they froze. But she made it sound like I was doing surgery. She asked how long I had worked there. And before I could stop myself, the whole story came tumbling out in a stripped-down version. My parents kicked me out. I am figuring things out. 2 jobs, tiny apartment, no plan beyond survival. Instead of giving me the usual pity face people do, she just stared at me for a second and said, "You know, my startup is always looking for people who can problem solve and actually show up. You ever thought about tech?" I laughed, because it sounded ridiculous. Me and tech, I did not even finish college. She told me about coding boot camps, how a lot of people switched careers without a degree, how the internet was full of free resources. Then she did something unexpected. She wrote her email on the back of my receipt and said, "If you are serious about changing your life, send me a message. I cannot promise anything, but I can point you in the right direction." That night after my burger shift, I sat at the tiny table in my studio with my laptop open, searching for everything she had mentioned: free courses, beginner friendly tutorials, coding boot camps in Seattle. The words on the screen might as well have been in another language, but there was one thought I could not shake. I had already lost everything once. What was the worst that could happen if I tried and failed again? Over the next few months, I carved out pockets of time that did not exist. I watched tutorials on JavaScript during my lunch breaks. I printed out cheat sheets and taped them above my thrift store desk. I joined free online communities where people asked and answered questions I barely understood. But slowly, very slowly, things started clicking. Late one night, after finishing a practice project, I finally worked up the courage to email Monica. I told her I was serious. I sent screenshots of my messy little websites, the ones I had built by copying tutorials line by line and then tweaking them. She wrote back. Not with a job offer, but with something better. A link to a part-time coding boot camp she recommended and a note that said, "If you get into this and commit, I will talk to my team about an internship." I applied, assuming it was a long shot. Somehow, I got in. My schedule became insane. Grocery store in the morning, burger place on fewer nights because I needed time to study, boot camp classes in the evenings and on weekends. I lived on ramen, black coffee, and the occasional free meal when the burger place had mistakes. My friends stopped inviting me out because the answer was always, "I have to work," or "I have to study." There were so many nights I felt stupid and behind, staring at error messages until my eyes burned. There were days I wanted to quit, especially when my body felt like it was giving up before my brain did. But every time I thought about dropping out, I saw that pile of my belongings on my parents' lawn again. I heard my mom saying, "You will thank us one day." I decided if I was ever going to thank them, it would be for underestimating me. A year later, I finished the boot camp. I was not some genius coder, but I could build things that worked. Monica set up an interview with her startup, and for the first time in my life, I sat in a conference room in real clothes instead of a polo with a name tag. I talked about problem solving and customer frustration from the grocery store, late night teamwork from the burger place, and grit from balancing it all with learning something totally new. They hired me as a junior front-end developer. The pay was more than both my jobs combined, and there was a clear path to grow. When the offer email hit my inbox, I stood in the middle of my cramped studio and just stared at it. The girl who had hauled her life into a motel room on her birthday was now being asked to join a tech company in Seattle. I did not cry. I did not call my parents. I just whispered to myself, "You threw me out to make room for Jenna and her future. You wanted me gone so badly. All you really did was give me the space to build my own." When I started at the startup as a junior developer, I felt like an imposter in my own life. The office was in downtown Seattle, all glass windows and cold brew on tap, the kind of place I used to imagine only existed in movies. The first few months, I kept expecting someone to walk over, tap my shoulder, and tell me they had made a mistake. That I was supposed to be back at the grocery store asking if customers wanted paper or plastic. Instead, I kept showing up. I asked stupid questions. I stayed late to fix bugs. I watched how the senior devs solved problems and copied their habits. I took notes on everything. Monica never treated me like a charity case. She gave me real work and real feedback. Sometimes blunt enough to sting, but always followed with, "You can do better than this." And I know it. Slowly, my code broke less, and my confidence broke more in the right places. A year passed. I moved from junior to mid-level. I got my first raise, then another. For the first time, my bank account was not a constant emergency. I still lived in that tiny studio for longer than I needed to, partly because I was scared the good streak would end, and partly because I was used to squeezing myself into small spaces. But one day, my lease notice came with a rent hike that made my eyes widen. I sat at my little table with a spreadsheet open, listing out my income, my expenses, and something wild started forming at the edge of my mind. What if instead of paying more for that shoebox, I put this money into something I actually owned? The idea of owning anything bigger than a thrift store couch felt like fantasy, but I could not shake it. I started listening to personal finance podcasts on my commute. I learned what a credit score really meant, what a down payment actually looked like in numbers, not just vague adult talk. I looked at my online accounts and realized something insane. Between my salary, a few freelance website gigs I kept on the side, and the way I had been too scared to spend for years, I actually had savings. Not rich people savings, but enough to start a serious conversation. I met with a loan officer who walked me through lending options, pre-approval, interest rates. It felt like he was speaking another language, but I kept asking questions until the numbers lined up into something I understood. You are in a much better position than most people your age, he said. I thought about my parents telling me I was a burden, that I would never grow if they did not push me out. I did not say it out loud, but there was a part of me that wanted to frame that email and nail it to their old front door. I spent weekends touring places in different neighborhoods. Some were way out of my league, staged with perfect fake families in the brochures. Some were run down and depressing in a way that hit too close to where I had started. Then I walked into a narrow 3-story townhouse in Ballard, not fancy enough to be on a magazine cover, but solid. Clean lines, small backyard, a little balcony off the master bedroom. Sunlight spilled through the living room windows just right, catching dust motes in the air like glitter. The kitchen was open, with enough counter space to cook real food instead of just microwaving whatever was on sale. Upstairs, there was a bonus room that could be an office or a guest room, or maybe, just maybe, a space where I could build something entirely my own. I stood there listening to the quiet, and for the first time since leaving my parents' house, I felt what home could feel like when it did not belong to someone who could kick me out on a whim. I made an offer. The negotiations felt like a game I had not been trained for, but my agent guided me through. When I got the call that my offer was accepted, I was sitting at my desk at work staring at a bug report. I had to step into the stairwell to catch my breath. The girl who once counted change to afford a motel room was now about to sign papers that would put her name on a property deed. On closing day, I sat in a bland office signing stack after stack of documents. Every time the pen hit paper, I remembered a different version of myself. The kid sneaking grocery store sushi into her bedroom, the cashier with aching feet, the girl wrapping her belongings in blankets on the lawn while her family watched. Each signature felt like a line separating me from that past. When it was done, the woman across from me slid the final folder away and said, "Congratulations, homeowner." Walking into the townhouse with my own keys was surreal. There was no furniture yet, just echoing rooms and bare walls that smelled like fresh paint and possibility. I lay on the living room floor that night with a single pillow and a blanket, staring up at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the city outside and the deep quiet inside. No one could come in and tell me I was taking up too much space. No one could decide my room was needed for someone else. This place had my name on it. Over the next months, I built a life inside those walls. I bought a couch that did not come off the curb. I set up a proper desk with a real monitor in the spare room and called it my office. I hosted a few friends from work, cooked for them, laughed too loudly, and nobody complained about noise. On nights when the sky was clear, I would stand on the small balcony with a mug of tea and look out over the neighborhood, thinking about the path from that roadside motel to here. I started sharing pieces of my story online, not to rant about my parents, but to talk about getting kicked out, hitting bottom, and clawing my way back. People started responding. Strangers messaged me saying they felt seen, that their own families had pushed them out in different ways. For the first time, my pain felt useful to someone other than me. I thought the story might end there. Kicked out on my birthday, fought my way up, bought a house. Neat little arc. But life is not a movie. And apparently, my parents did not like being written out of my ending. One quiet Sunday afternoon, I was in the kitchen unpacking groceries, humming to myself, when my doorbell rang. I did not think much of it. Maybe a package? Maybe a neighbor? I wiped my hands on a towel, walked to the front door, and glanced at the camera screen out of habit. When I saw who was standing on my porch, my stomach dropped. My mother, my father, and my sister. All three of them, right there at the front door of the house I had built without them. For a second, I thought the camera was glitching. But no, it was them. My mom in front, hair grayer and makeup heavier. My dad slumped behind her, Jenna off to the side with her phone in her hand. I could have pretended I was not home, but I was done hiding in places I paid for. I opened the door. My mom looked me up and down, then passed me into the house. "Natalie, you look different," she said, eyes already inventorying my furniture. "What are you doing here?" I asked. My dad tried a soft voice. "Can we come in for a minute? It is important." Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. They walked in like they owned the air. My mom ran her fingers along the couch. "This is nice, much nicer than that little place you used to have." Jenna glanced around, impressed despite herself. "Damn, Nat. You really got yourself a whole house." I stayed by the kitchen island. "Why are you here?" I asked again. My dad sighed. "Things have been hard. I lost my job. The mortgage is killing us. We might lose the house." My mom cut in. "The bank does not care how long we have been there. They just want money. We heard you bought a place. This changes everything." I felt a flicker of sympathy, but it cooled fast. "I am sorry things are rough," I said. "But what does that have to do with my home?" My mom gave me a look like I was being dense. "This is not just your home," she said. "This is a family asset." The phrase dropped like a stone. "Excuse me," I said. She gestured at the walls. "We raised you. Roof, food, clothes. We pushed you to be independent. If we had not kicked you out, you would still be stuck in that dead-end grocery store. Our tough love made you who you are. So of course what you have now should benefit the whole family." My dad nodded. "We are not asking for much. We just need to stay here for a while. Your mom and I can take one room, Jenna another. You still have that office, right? You do not need a whole room just for a desk. Maybe we even put our names on the paperwork so the bank sees it is shared. It helps everyone." I almost laughed. "You kicked me out because you said there was no room?" I reminded them. "You needed my bedroom for Jenna's online classes. Now suddenly my house is the solution to all your problems." My mom waved a hand. "We did that for you," she snapped. "If we had not pushed you, you would never have left. You should be grateful. This is our investment paying off. A family asset." Jenna chimed in. "Mom was right. You leveled up. Everyone I know moved out years ago. You have extra rooms. Why are you being so selfish?" There it was. The old word. "I am not selfish for living in the house I worked and paid for," I said. "You did not co-sign anything. You are not on the deed. This is mine." My mom's eyes went hard. "You would not have this job without us. We sacrificed. We struggled. We pushed you. You owe us. One signature from you and your parents are not on the street. Or would you rather see us homeless while you sit here alone?" The guilt used to work on me. Now it just made me tired. "You made your choices," I said. "I made mine. I am not putting my home or my future at risk, so you can pretend this is some group project." Jenna scoffed. "Money really changed you." I shook my head. "Being thrown out like trash on my birthday changed me. Money just means you cannot do it again." My mom's voice dropped. If you do not help us, we will take legal action. We are your parents. We have rights. Any judge will see this is a family asset and you are hoarding it. For a second, the old fear stirred. Then I remembered whose name was on every page that mattered. Talk to any lawyer you want, I said. You are not moving in. You are not touching my house. And you need to leave. Now. My dad tried one last time. Natalie, please. We are your family. You did this, I answered. I opened the door wide. Cold light spilled in. Last time, you told me to leave. This time, I am the one asking you to go. My mom let out a bitter laugh and walked past me. My dad followed, staring at the floor. Jenna brushed by and muttered, You are going to regret this. I closed the door and turned the lock. My hands were shaking, but underneath the adrenaline there was a steady calm. They had walked into my home convinced that one phrase, family asset, would be enough to scare me into giving up what I built. They still thought I was the girl with her life in boxes on their lawn. They had no idea that this time I was not the one who needed to be afraid. When the door clicked shut behind them, I stood there with my back against it, breathing hard, listening to the echo of their threat repeat in my head like a bad commercial. Legal action, family asset, parents' rights. The old me would have spiraled, Googling laws at 3 a.m. and imagining worst-case scenarios. The version of me who had signed a mortgage and debugged code at 2 a.m. knew better than to let panic be the only plan. So I did what I always did now when I felt out of my depth. I called someone who actually knew what they were talking about. In this case, that someone was Eric Ramirez, a guy I had met years back through a friend of a friend who had gone from bartending to law school while I was going from grocery store cashier to developer. We had reconnected in Seattle when I learned he was practicing civil law and doing some work with tenants and financial disputes. We were not best friends, but we trusted each other enough to share war stories about crappy landlords and bad bosses. I texted him, Hey, I think my parents are about to try something crazy with my house. Do you have time to talk? He called within an hour. I told him everything, from being kicked out on my birthday to the visit in my living room and the words family asset dropping out of my mom's mouth like a grenade. There was a long pause on the other end when I finished. Okay, he finally said. First of all, breathe. They are not on your deed, correct? Correct, I said. I bought this house years after they threw me out. They did not help with anything. It is in my name only. Then legally, they have no ownership claim just because they share DNA, he said. They can talk all they want about what's fair or family, but in court, paper beats guilt trips. However, the fact that they threatened legal action and are trying to pressure you into adding them to the deed, that is sketchy as hell. And the way they kicked you out before? Also not a great look for them. I felt a small knot of tension loosen in my chest. So they cannot actually force me to give them anything? No judge is going to magically turn your private property into a shared family asset because your mom thinks she deserves a cut, he said. But there is something else we need to think about. You said you used to help them with paperwork and bills back when you lived there, right? Yeah, I said slowly. I was the only one who could navigate online forms without yelling at the computer. Why? Because people who feel entitled to your house years later are often the same people who felt entitled to your information back then, he said. Before we do anything else, I want you to pull your full credit report, not the cute free app version, the real one. We need to make sure they have not already been using you to prop themselves up financially. The thought made my stomach drop. I remembered sitting at their kitchen table years ago, filling in lines on credit card applications while my mom rushed me, saying, "Just sign here. It is for the family." I had been too tired and too trusting to ask questions. Now I saw those memories in a different light. That night, I sat at my desk in the home office they wanted to claim, logged into all three major credit bureaus, and requested my reports. When they finally loaded, I felt like I was looking at someone else's life. There were accounts I recognized. My student loan from the 1 year of college I managed before dropping out, my own credit card, the auto loan on my car. And then, there were accounts I had never seen before, store cards I had never used. A line of credit opened the year I got kicked out. A couple of small personal loans under my name, linked to an address I used to share with my parents. My chest went cold. I called Eric back and told him what I was seeing. That, he said calmly, is identity theft. At best, unauthorized use. At worst, outright fraud. And if your parents open those in your name without your knowledge or consent, we are going to need to involve more than just a stern email. Over the next few weeks, my life became a weird mix of normal and surreal. By day, I went to work, wrote code, sat in meetings about product roadmaps, and laughed with coworkers in the kitchen. By night, I sat at my dining table with Eric on speakerphone, gathering documents, highlighting dates, cross-checking addresses, and piecing together the paper trail of how my parents had quietly turned my name into a safety net while calling me a burden to my face. Eric helped me file formal disputes with the credit bureaus for the accounts I did not open. We contacted the banks and lenders, sent notarized letters, and submitted affidavits explaining that I had been kicked out and had no knowledge of these debts. Some institutions were cooperative. Others treated me like I was the one pulling a scam. Every time a customer service rep questioned my story, I thought about calling my parents and screaming at them. Instead, I reminded myself that I was not cleaning up their mess for them. I was cleaning my name for me. At the same time, Eric filed a request for a restraining order based on my parents' threats and their history of kicking me out. We included screenshots of texts my mom sent after the visit, messages like, "You will regret choosing a house over your family," and "We will make sure everyone knows how heartless you are." They thought they were guilt trips. To the court, they looked a lot like harassment. "You sure you want to go through with this?" Eric asked me one night. "Once we file, it is official. This is not just a family argument anymore." I thought about the girl who had stood on the lawn with her life in boxes while her own mother told her to figure it out. I thought about them walking into my house like they were entitled to it, asking me to sign away control without blinking. "Yeah," I said. "I am sure." They did not hesitate when they put me out. I am done hesitating when it comes to protecting myself. The court granted a temporary order first, which meant my parents were legally barred from coming to my house or my workplace while the full hearing was scheduled. When the papers were served, my phone blew up. My mom called, left voicemails screaming about betrayal and shame. My dad sent long texts about how this could all be handled privately. Jenna sent one message, "You really dragged the law into this?" Dramatic much. I did not respond to any of them. Instead, I forwarded everything to Eric. He added it to the file. And then, quietly, another piece moved on the board. Some of the disputed accounts triggered internal reviews on the lender's side. One of them flagged unusual patterns and forwarded the file to a federal agency. Another one, tied to a fake home improvement loan taken out right before my parents' financial freefall, kicked the information over to the IRS because the income records did not match. "This is where it might get bigger than you," Eric warned me. "If they have been playing games with taxes or using your identity to secure more credit, the IRS is not going to shrug and walk away." Part of me felt uneasy about that. These were still my parents, as messed up as they were. The idea of them facing an investigation made my stomach knot. But another part of me, the part that had stood in a roadside motel counting crumpled bills while their names stayed clean, felt something closer to justice. Months passed. There were forms, hearings, more calls than I can count. Then, the restraining order was made permanent. They argued in court that I was overreacting. that kids these days called everything abuse, that they had only ever tried to teach me responsibility. But under oath, with documentation laid out, their story did not hold. They could not explain why they had open loans tied to my social security number. They could not explain text messages that sounded like threats. They could not spin the image of shoving their daughter out on her birthday into some noble sacrifice. The judge granted the order, citing a pattern of emotional manipulation and financial exploitation. My parents left that courtroom looking smaller than I had ever seen them. That was just round one. Round two came when the IRS finished whatever quiet work they had been doing in the background. I was called in as a witness, not a suspect, to explain what I knew and what I did not know about the loans and accounts. I answered honestly. I had signed forms I did not understand under pressure. I had trusted them not to use me. I had been cut out of the house and the finances the minute I stopped being convenient. When I walked out of the federal building, I felt like I had just opened a window that had been painted shut for years. Eventually, letters started arriving at my parents' address and their new rental place. Notices, demands, investigations into unpaid taxes, unreported income, and fraudulent applications. Their old house, the one they had thrown me out of to make space for my sister, was seized and sold to cover part of what they owed. The irony did not escape me. The house that had been their fortress, their symbol of superiority, was now gone because of their own choices. Without that house, without good credit, without the steady job my dad had lost, their options shrank fast. They moved into a small apartment on the edge of town, then into something even smaller when the bills kept coming. My mom went from bragging on Facebook about her perfect family to posting vague rants about ungrateful children and corrupt systems, pointed but never detailed enough to admit what actually happened. My dad picked up odd jobs doing whatever he could, pride swallowed whole. Jenna, who once sneered at me for working in a grocery store, ended up folding clothes in a retail chain during the day and doing delivery app runs at night, complaining online about how the world was unfair. I knew all this not because I stalked them, but because people sent me screenshots asking, "Is this about you?" I never answered publicly. Instead, I told my side of the story in a way that did not name them but did not hide what happened either. I talked about parents who weaponize guilt, about families who feel entitled to their adult children's success while never owning the harm they caused. I talked about being kicked out on my birthday, about sleeping in a motel, about learning to separate love from loyalty to people who kept hurting me. The more I shared, the more I heard from others who had lived variations of the same script. It turned out I was not special. That was strangely comforting. One night, months after everything had settled legally, I was sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open when another email from a lender came in. "We have completed our investigation," it read. "We have determined that you are not responsible for the debts in question. These accounts will be removed from your credit report." I stared at the words for a long time. My name, the one they had signed on forms like it was theirs to use, was finally clean. My house was safe. My future was mine. I thought back to my mom standing in this very kitchen declaring that this place was a family asset. In a way, she had been right, but not in the way she meant. Their part of the story ended in courtrooms and collections notices, in small apartments and smaller lives. Mine was just getting started. For the first time, the scales felt even. They had pushed me out, used me, tried to lay claim to what I built. And in the end, all they really did was give me the distance and the motivation to build a life they could not touch. In the quiet that came after the lawyers and letters and courtrooms, I started to realize something uncomfortable. Winning does not bring back what you never had. There was no moment where my parents suddenly understood. No tearful apology, no neat reconciliation. They kept telling anyone who would listen that I had ruined their lives, that I had chosen a house over my own blood. I used to replay that accusation in my head, wondering if there was any version of this story where I could have helped them without destroying myself. But every time I walked through my front door, dropped my keys in the bowl by the entryway, and felt the solid weight of my own safety, I knew the answer. They had spent years teaching me that love meant sacrificing myself for their comfort. Cutting them off was the first lesson I ever wrote for myself. My life started to fill with new kinds of people. Coworkers who checked on me when I looked tired. Neighbors who brought cookies when I shoveled their side of the sidewalk. Friends who crashed on my couch, not because they had been kicked out, but because we were up too late laughing to bother driving home. On Wednesday nights, I hosted a small group at my dining table, a mismatched circle of people who had their own stories of families that hurt more than they helped. We did not sit around bashing our parents. We compared notes on boundaries. We talked about therapy, about savings accounts, about the first time each of us realized we were allowed to say no without providing a full essay of reasons. My house became exactly what my parents had tried to claim it was. Not a family asset, but a safe place where people could land, rest, and then launch again on their own terms. Sometimes, late at night, I would stand in the doorway of the spare room that they had wanted for themselves and just look at it. The neatly made bed, the shelf of books, the desk where I sometimes wrote. I could almost see two timelines layered on top of each other. In one, my parents were in there, slamming doors, complaining about everything I did wrong, turning my home into another place I tiptoed through. In the one I chose, that room stayed open for the version of me who needed it most, and for anyone else who needed proof that starting over was possible. I will not pretend it is easy to choose yourself over your family. It is one of the hardest things I have ever done. There are still holidays where I feel a sting scrolling past pictures of big smiling families around long tables. But I have learned something important. Blood is not a free pass to hurt you over and over again. Being related does not give someone automatic rights to your time, your money, or your home. Love without respect is just control dressed up in prettier words. My parents used to say I would thank them one day for kicking me out. I do not thank them for the cruelty or the lies, but I can admit this much. The day they threw me out on my birthday was the day I stopped living in their story and started writing my own. If you are listening to this and recognizing pieces of your life in mine, I want you to know you are not crazy, you are not ungrateful, and you are not alone. You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to build a life that the people who hurt you are not allowed to enter. They tried to tell me this house was a family asset. They were right about one thing. It is about family. I just finally chose a different one, starting with me.